Imagine a world without the concepts of good and evil. Different societies have their own ideas about what's good or bad. There aren't any actions that are always considered virtuous or sinful by everyone. Instead, it's like a spectrum where behaviors can be seen differently depending on where you are. What we call morality often feels natural, even divine, as though it were etched into the fabric of our existence. The uncomfortable reality is that morality isn't some unchanging rule of the universe. It's something humans came up with based on our experiences and influenced by what society expects from us. In philosophy, morality is a set of principles that helps us define right and wrong, good and bad. But these principles are not fixed. They bend under the weight of culture, time, and power dynamics. What one civilization praises as virtuous, another may condemn as evil. The definitions of morality, far from being universal truths, are mirrors reflecting the values, fears, and priorities of the societies that create them. Moral philosophy started a long time ago in ancient Greece. This is where the first thinkers began thinking about what is right and wrong. They explored whether morality was absolute, a universal truth, or a relative concept, shaped by the experiences and beliefs of individuals and societies. These debates laid the foundation for how humanity has approached morality for centuries. In Athens, two very important philosophers, Socrates and his student Plato, supported the idea of moral objectivism. This means they believed that morality is based on universal truths, and not just opinions or cultural traditions. Socrates believed that moral truths were eternal and unchanging. He argued that concepts such as justice, virtue, and goodness existed independently of human opinion. In his dialogues, captured by Plato, Socrates used a method of questioning, known as the Socratic method, to discover these truths. Socrates taught that to truly understand what is right and wrong, people need to think deeply and use their reason. In the dialogue Euthyphro, Socrates questions what makes something pious. He asks if something is good simply because the gods say so, or if the gods say it's good because it really is good. This question highlights his belief in the existence of an objective standard of morality. Socrates himself became a martyr for his moral beliefs, choosing to drink hemlock rather than abandon his principles. His trial and death illustrate his commitment to the idea that moral truths must be upheld even in the face of opposition. Plato expanded on Socrates' ideas, presenting his famous theory of forms to explain the nature of morality. According to Plato, the material world is a shadow of a higher eternal reality, the world of forms. What are forms? Forms are perfect, unchanging ideas that exist beyond the physical world. For example, while individual acts of kindness may differ, they all participate in the eternal form of goodness. Plato believed that morality existed in this realm of forms, making it objective and eternal. In the Republic, Plato describes the allegory of the cave, where prisoners in a cave see only shadows on a wall and mistake them for reality. The journey out of the cave symbolizes the philosopher's quest to understand the forms, including the form of the good, which illuminates all other virtues like justice and courage. For Plato, moral knowledge was about discovering these perfect forms through reason and philosophy. His work set a precedent for linking morality to an objective, rational standard, influencing countless philosophers after him. While Socrates and Plato pursued universal truths, another group of thinkers, the Sophists, took a very different approach. The Sophists were teachers and rhetoricians who argued that morality was not absolute but relative, varying from one person or culture to another. One of the most famous Sophists, Protagoras, summed up moral relativism with his statement, "Man is the measure of all things." What does this mean? Protagoras believed that truth, including moral truth, depends on individual perception. What is good for one person may not be good for another. Similarly, what one culture considers virtuous, another may condemn. In some ancient Greek city-states, military prowess was celebrated as the highest virtue, while in others, such as Athens, intellectual debate and democracy were more highly valued. Protagoras' relativism suggested that both systems could be moral depending on the context. The Sophists questioned the very idea of a universal standard for morality. Instead, they saw morality as a social construct created to serve the needs and interests of those in power. Sophists often taught that rhetoric and persuasion were more important than seeking objective truth. For them, morality could be shaped by skillful argument rather than by discovering universal principles. Socrates and Plato were harsh critics of the Sophists, accusing them of undermining moral integrity. Plato, in particular, argued that relativism led to moral chaos, where individuals could justify any action based on personal or cultural convenience. The debates between moral objectivism and relativism in ancient Greece revealed two fundamentally different views of morality. Objectivists like Socrates and Plato believed in eternal, unchanging moral truths that could be discovered through reason. Relativists like Protagoras and the Sophists argued that morality was subjective, shaped by human experience and cultural norms. The Middle Ages were a time when morality was deeply intertwined with religion, especially in the Christian-dominated world of Europe. Philosophers and theologians argued that morality came directly from God, forming an inseparable link between divine will and human conduct. St. Augustine, a pivotal figure in early Christian philosophy, believed that morality was rooted in God's will. For Augustine, human beings were inherently sinful due to the doctrine of original sin, but divine grace offered a path to redemption. True morality, according to Augustine, was obedience to God's commandments. Humans could not achieve moral goodness on their own. They needed divine intervention and faith. Augustine's teachings reinforced the idea that morality was inseparable from religious devotion. Augustine's views emerged during the decline of the Roman Empire, a time of social instability. His writings offered a moral framework that emphasized spiritual salvation over worldly concerns. Centuries later, Thomas Aquinas expanded on Augustine's ideas, blending Christian theology with the philosophy of Aristotle. Aquinas argued that morality was part of natural law, a universal moral order established by God. Through reason, humans could discern God's law and apply it to their lives. For example, the instinct to preserve life or care for others was seen as part of this divine order. Unlike Augustine, Aquinas believed reason and faith worked together. During the Middle Ages, the balance between faith and reason was often fraught with tension. The Church held significant authority, viewing moral inquiry as subordinate to religious dogma. Moral laws were often equated with divine commands, and questioning them was considered heretical. What are heresies? Heresies were beliefs or practices that contradict church teachings. The Church justified its actions by claiming to defend divine morality. This reflected the belief that moral truth was fixed, and any deviation threatened societal order. Even though the idea of God's deciding right and wrong was very strong, some thinkers started to explore how reason could also play a role in morality. This set the stage for new ideas about morality that came later during the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a period of intellectual awakening in Europe when thinkers began challenging religious authority and seeking moral truths through reason. This era marked a dramatic shift from divine morality to secular, rational approaches. One of the most influential Enlightenment philosophers, Immanuel Kant, argued that morality was not derived from religion, but from human reason. Kant proposed the categorical imperative. Moral actions must be guided by principles that could be universally applied. For example, if lying is wrong, it must be wrong for everyone in every circumstance. For Kant, true morality came from acting out of duty, not personal gain or emotional impulse. A person helping others because it's the right thing to do, not for a reward, is acting morally. Even though many believed that God's decided what was right or wrong, some thinkers started to explore how human reason could also shape morality. This paved the way for new ideas about morality that emerged during the Enlightenment. During the Enlightenment, a new way of thinking about morality called utilitarianism was developed. Jeremy Bentham and later John Stuart Mill supported this idea, which focuses on practical ways to make decisions that bring the most good to the most people. Bentham believed that the best action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Public policies should be evaluated based on their ability to maximize societal well-being. John Stuart Mill expanded utilitarianism by highlighting the importance of the quality of happiness, not just the amount. He believed that intellectual pleasures like reading and learning are better than physical pleasures like eating or entertainment. Critics of Enlightenment moral theories like Kantian ethics and utilitarianism argue that these theories tend to overlook cultural diversity. Both approaches sometimes assume that there is a single correct way to think about morality. For example, a Kantian principle might emphasize individual rights, which may not resonate in societies that prioritize collective values over individual ones. Relativists, on the other hand, believe that morality should reflect cultural and historical contexts rather than universal laws. They argue that what is considered moral can vary significantly between different societies. For instance, practices like arranged marriages might be seen as moral and valuable in one culture, but viewed as restrictive and less acceptable in another. The idea of moral relativism, the belief that morality is not universal but varies across cultures, contexts, and individuals, gained prominence as philosophers began to question the existence of absolute moral truths. Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most radical thinkers of the 19th century, proclaimed the death of God in his work, The Gay Science. This metaphorical declaration symbolized the decline of religious authority in modern societies. Nietzsche argued that with the decline of religion, the foundation of absolute morality crumbled. Without God as the ultimate source of moral laws, humanity faced the challenge of redefining good and evil on its own. The death of God led to nihilism, a state where traditional values lost their meaning. Nietzsche warned that this could result in moral chaos unless humanity created new values. Nietzsche introduced the concepts of master morality and slave morality to explain how moral systems are shaped by power dynamics. Master morality is rooted in the values of the strong and powerful, emphasizing traits like strength, ambition, and pride. An example of this can be seen in ancient aristocratic societies, where rulers set the standards for what was considered moral based on their dominance and authority. In contrast, slave morality developed among the weak and oppressed as a reaction to master morality. It values traits like humility, compassion, and obedience. Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher, viewed Christian morality as a form of slave morality. He believed it was designed to challenge and subvert the values of the powerful by glorifying suffering and meekness. Nietzsche's analysis challenged the assumption that morality was universal. Instead, he saw it as a tool wielded by different groups to justify their positions in society. Postmodern thinkers expanded on Nietzsche's skepticism, questioning the idea of fixed moral truths and exploring how morality is influenced by power and language. Michel Foucault argued that morality is not a timeless truth, but a product of power structures. He believed that those in power shape moral norms to maintain control over society. For example, the moral condemnation of certain behaviors, such as homosexuality, historically served to marginalize and regulate populations, used to justify systems of surveillance and punishment, reinforcing authority. For instance, the shift from public executions to prison systems reflected changing moral attitudes, but these changes still served power dynamics. Jacques Derrida, a pioneer of deconstruction, challenged the rigid binary oppositions often used in morality, such as good versus evil. Derrida argued that moral concepts are not absolute but are dependent on context and interpretation. What is considered just in one situation may be unjust in another, depending on who defines justice. Derrida's philosophy emphasized the need to question and reinterpret moral values rather than accept them as fixed truths. Moral relativism asserts that morality depends on cultural, historical, and personal contexts, rejecting the notion of universal moral truths. Different societies have distinct moral codes. Practices like arranged marriages or polygamy are morally accepted in some cultures but condemned in others. Morality changes over time within the same society. Views on women's rights and racial equality have evolved significantly in the past century. Individual perspectives influence moral judgments. A person's moral stance on euthanasia may depend on personal experiences with suffering. While moral relativism has its appeal, critics argue that it undermines the possibility of objective moral progress. Thomas Nagel argued for a framework of objective moral values, asserting that some principles like fairness and harm avoidance transcend cultural differences. Philippa Foot emphasized the role of virtues in creating a stable and flourishing society, suggesting that some moral values are universally necessary for human well-being. Critics point to historical examples of moral evolution, such as the abolition of slavery, as evidence of objective moral improvement. Some argue that universal principles, like human rights, demonstrate a shared moral foundation despite cultural differences. Existentialism revolutionized moral philosophy by placing the individual at the center of ethical decision-making. Unlike traditional frameworks that sought universal moral principles, existentialists argued that morality emerges from personal freedom and responsibility. Jean-Paul Sartre, a leading existentialist philosopher, declared that life has no inherent meaning or purpose. In his seminal work, Being and Nothingness, Sartre argued that humans are condemned to be free. What does it mean to be free? Sartre believed that, in the absence of preordained values, humans must create their own moral framework. This freedom is both liberating and burdensome, as individuals are solely responsible for their choices. Sartre rejected the idea that external forces such as biology or society determine morality. Instead, every individual must actively choose their values and actions. Jean-Paul Sartre, a prominent existentialist philosopher, introduced the concept of authenticity. He believed that individuals should take responsibility for their choices without blaming external factors. Inauthenticity occurs when people conform to societal norms to avoid the anxiety that comes with freedom. Sartre emphasized that every action contributes to defining humanity's moral fabric. In his work, Existentialism is a Humanism, Sartre illustrated this with the story of a young man torn between joining the French resistance during World War II or staying home to care for his ailing mother. Sartre argued that there was no preordained correct answer to this dilemma. The man had to create his own values through his actions, highlighting the weight of personal responsibility. Simone de Beauvoir, an existentialist and feminist philosopher, expanded on Sartre's ideas in her work, The Ethics of Ambiguity. She emphasized the inherent complexity of moral choices. De Beauvoir argued that life is filled with contradictions, where no single moral rule can resolve all dilemmas. In relationships, balancing one's freedom with respect for others' autonomy creates constant moral tension. De Beauvoir explored how social hierarchies and gender roles shape moral responsibility. In The Second Sex, she criticized societal structures that limit women's freedom, arguing that true morality involves promoting others' ability to act freely. For de Beauvoir, moral actions must respect both personal freedom and the freedom of others. This involves an ongoing struggle to act ethically in a world without fixed guidelines. While existentialism focused on individual morality, other philosophers examined how power and societal structures shape moral norms. Thomas Hobbes, a 17th century philosopher, argued in Leviathan that morality arises from the need to escape the state of nature, a hypothetical condition where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes proposed that individuals surrender some freedoms to a governing authority in exchange for security and order. Morality in this framework is a set of rules agreed upon to maintain peace. Critics argue that social contract theory reduces morality to mere practicality, ignoring deeper ethical principles. Social contracts often reflect the interests of the powerful, marginalizing certain groups. Karl Marx viewed morality as part of the ideological superstructure, shaped by the economic base of society. Marx argued that ruling classes create moral norms to justify and perpetuate their dominance. During the Industrial Revolution, labor exploitation was morally justified as a necessity for economic progress. Marx's theory of historical materialism suggests that moral systems evolve alongside economic changes. The rise of socialism challenged capitalist moral norms, emphasizing collective welfare over individual profit. Power dynamics play a critical role in shaping what societies deem moral or immoral. Michel Foucault explored how morality is used as a tool of social control. In Discipline and Punish, he examined the evolution of punishment systems, showing how moral codes justified new methods of surveillance and regulation. Foucault argued that moral norms are not universal truths, but constructs designed to maintain authority. Morality, long seen as a guiding force for human behavior, becomes far more complex when viewed as a construct shaped by society, culture, and history. Moral relativism, which posits that morality is not absolute but context-dependent, raises unique challenges in addressing contemporary ethical dilemmas. In a world where different cultures and perspectives mix together, moral relativism helps us understand these differences. However, it also makes it harder to agree on global issues. If morality is indeed a construct, what do the concepts of good and evil represent? Philosophical inquiry into these terms reveals their deep connection to personal and collective identity. These terms have been used throughout history to define groups, justify actions, and establish societal order. For example, in medieval Europe, the Church labeled heretics as evil to consolidate its authority, shaping collective morality through fear and control. Similarly, colonial powers framed indigenous practices as evil to rationalize their dominance. What one society considers good, another may view as evil. An example is how political ideologies frequently frame their opponents in moral terms, fostering division but also rallying support. Good and evil provide a sense of order in a chaotic world, helping individuals navigate ethical dilemmas. However, rigid adherence to these categories can lead to moral absolutism, stifling critical reflection and understanding. Viewing morality as a construct invites individuals to critically examine their moral beliefs and consider their origins. Individuals should reflect on how their upbringing, culture, and personal experiences have shaped their sense of right and wrong. For example, a person raised in a collectivist society may prioritize family obligations over personal freedom, while someone in an individualist society might have the opposite values. Acknowledging that morality as a construct allows for greater openness to other perspectives. Exposure to different cultures often reveals that what seems universally moral may be context-specific. Societies must engage in open, inclusive discussions to reconcile differing moral perspectives. Debates about climate change policies, for instance, require input from diverse cultures to create fair and effective solutions. In an increasingly globalized world, fostering a shared sense of moral responsibility is essential for addressing collective challenges. Recognizing morality as fluid encourages adaptability and growth in response to changing circumstances. The evolution of moral stances on issues like gender equality demonstrates humanity's capacity for ethical progress. For me, understanding that morality is not a universal truth, but a human construct, has been both liberating and humbling. It's a reminder that the values we hold dear are shaped by the cultures, histories, and experiences that surround us, not by some absolute standard. This realization has made me question my own beliefs and biases. It's not always comfortable, but it's a necessary step toward empathy and growth. Letting go of the idea of fixed good and evil doesn't mean abandoning morality. It means taking responsibility for creating a framework that respects diversity and evolves with our shared humanity.